On the tax issue, you had a new governor who, to your chagrin, had come out in the campaign saying there was no need immediately for a broad-based tax. How did you deal with that, and did you try to persuade people within the administration that there was some way to try to change that position?
Well, in the intervening time between the general election and Governor Burns swearing in, I believe there was the first of a series of Supreme Court decisions in the case of Robinson v. Cahill. That was the first education finance case to hit the judiciary. Later became Abbott versus Burke, which we deal with even today. So with Robinson versus Cahill, I didn't have to say very much. The court had spoken. And early in the new governor's administration, to his great credit, he put together a team of people who began working on meeting the court mandate. And that included a couple of the people I mentioned before, Dick Leone specifically, Cliff Goldman, and there may have been others who came onto the scene to help out in various ways. But that was the beginning of a 2.5-year process, or actually a 2-year process, that led to the adoption of the Education Act in 1975, which included Steve Wiley, who was my counterpart as the Senate Education Committee chairman, and it included people on the outside like Ernie Rioch from Rutgers, who provided enormous help to us. And it was that team of people that had a great deal to do with moving forward on the court decisions.
Al, we're now in the early months of the Byrne administration in 1974, and you've spoken about the impact of the Supreme Court's decisions in the series of school finance cases. Take us a little bit further in the story in terms of the court's decision, the impact on the legislature, and the reaction, I guess, to this sort of judicial mandate that the legislature do something about school finance in New Jersey.
It was a very intense, high-pressure time, and I can't recall ever having the kind of exhaustion, physical exhaustion, that I did during that approximately 18-month period during which we were attempting to come up with some solutions. And the reason for it was that we really started with a clean slate. And I recall being in the treasurer's outer office one day for a meeting at the very beginning of all this, before we had one word on a piece of paper, at which, as I mentioned earlier, Dick Leone and Cliff Goldman, I believe, was there, and a couple of other staff people, and Steve Wiley and myself. And we started with, I think, a chalkboard, or at least a pad, in which we began, all of us, with suggestions to make of the path to follow in trying to meet the court decision. How do we go about reconfiguring not only the education system, but also the finance side, which was so critical to the implementation phase? Because the court, both then and later, after it became the Wilentz Court, were quite prescriptive in what they felt the new system ought to show, so that it wasn't as though we had to wallow around in the mud and try to come up with some answers. They told us where there were deficiencies in New Jersey's educational system, and our task was to figure out how to get there.
In retrospect, the court's focus on dollar equivalency in terms of equalizing school spending in New Jersey. Again, with the benefit of hindsight and many years, was that a mistake, or were there other approaches that might have resulted in a better system today?
We didn't start out with the objective of having fiscal equivalency. The constitutional mandate of a thorough and efficient public education didn't mandate that. It provided that we should afford every child in the state exactly what the Constitution said, thorough and efficient education. Now, there were other educational decisions, one in particular that I read that was authored by the then Chief Justice Weintraub, in which he pointed out that equivalency was not really a constitutional necessity, that if you applied what was the theory of equal protection, New Jersey's equivalent of the Equal Protection Clause of the Federal Constitution, to the problems that arose out of unequal education, that the same principle could apply to the inequalities in police protection, in fire services, in all the municipal services that are characteristic of the cities as opposed to the suburbs. And they didn't want to go that route. They stayed away from the Equal Protection Clause. And inherent in that idea was that you didn't have to have an exact equality in the dollars spent per student in the poor districts as opposed to the wealthier districts. That was a concept that came later on.